A single cabin stands against the wind, its roof half collapsed, smoke struggling from the chimney. Inside, a man sits alone by the dying fire, shadows flickering across his scarred face. His hands tremble over an old photograph, two soldiers smiling beneath a torn flag. Then, a sound cuts through the storm. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. He opens the door, and there, in the snow, stands a wounded German shepherd, eyes filled with pain and purpose. The wind howls. The man whispers, "Logan, where are you watching from tonight? Leave a comment below and tell us, because somewhere out there, someone still believes in miracles." The wind howled like a dying beast through the broken pines of Ember Ridge. Snow whirled in thick, slanting sheets, devouring the world one flake at a time. The cabin on the ridge stood half buried in white, its roof sagging beneath the weight of winter, its chimney coughing out the last thin breath of smoke. Inside, the glow of a small fire flickered against the walls, bare, scarred wood that remembered better days. Caleb Rourke sat hunched by the hearth, his face a map of old wars. At 42, the once elite soldier looked older, gray at the temples, beard rough and overgrown, eyes pale as ice under heavy lids. His left hand trembled slightly as he lifted a metal cup to his lips. Whiskey, the only warmth he still trusted. On the table beside him lay a photograph. 2 men in desert uniforms, smiling beneath a flag half torn by wind. Caleb's thumb traced the face of the man beside him. Logan Vance, the friend he couldn't save. The storm beat harder. Every gust seemed to whisper the same words. "You left him." Caleb pressed his hands against his ears, but the wind had a way of finding its way in. He hadn't spoken to another soul in months. He hunted what he needed, chopped wood, and drank what little solace he could afford. Ember Ridge was where men came to disappear, and he was disappearing perfectly. Until that night. It began as a sound beneath the storm, faint but insistent. Not the wind, not the trees cracking in the cold. A thud. Then another. A pattern. A knock. Caleb froze, listening. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. Someone, or something, was at the door. He grabbed the old rifle leaning against the wall. His boots sank deep into the snow-covered floorboards as he moved toward the entrance. "Who's there?" His voice came out rough, almost unused. No answer, only the storm's long scream. He unlatched the bolt, pushed the door open a crack, and the night came roaring in. Through the blur of white, a dark shape staggered forward. It collapsed against the threshold. A large dog, fur matted with snow and blood. Its breath steamed in the cold air, shallow, ragged. A German shepherd. Caleb's instincts snapped awake. He knelt, lowering the rifle. The animal's eyes met his, sharp amber, intelligent, desperate. "Easy, boy," Caleb muttered, dragging the dog inside. The heat hit its body, and it shuddered violently. Blood stained the wooden floor. He fetched a blanket, tore it in 2, and began cleaning the wound, a deep gash along the flank, likely from a blade, not claws. "Who the hell did this to you?" The dog's tail twitched once. Around its neck was a collar. No, a band of military-grade paracord, worn but intact. Caleb frowned, running his fingers over it. The clasp was stamped with faded letters. Ranger Unit 17B. His heart kicked hard. Ranger. That was no coincidence. Logan's K-9 unit, his partner in the field. Caleb's breath hitched. He sat back, staring. No, that's impossible. You're dead. Both of you are dead." But the dog, Ranger, lifted his head and let out a low, broken whine. Then, staggering on trembling legs, he moved toward the door, pawing at it insistently. When Caleb didn't follow, Ranger barked, a single sharp note that cut through the storm. "Not tonight," Caleb said, shaking his head. "You're half dead, and I'm not going anywhere." Ranger barked again, louder this time. He turned to look at Caleb, eyes burning with purpose. Then, limping, he pressed his paw against the door handle. It wasn't random. It was direction, command, urgency. Caleb felt the old instinct stirring, the part of him that once moved before thinking. He sighed, grabbed his coat, slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Fine, you win, soldier. Lead the way." Outside, the storm swallowed them whole. The snow was waist-deep, the wind a living wall. Ranger pushed forward, nose low, every few steps glancing back to be sure Caleb followed. They trudged through the pines, their branches groaning under the weight of ice. The moon was a pale ghost behind the clouds. After what felt like miles, the trees thinned. Ahead lay a ridge, a sheer drop into a canyon carved by centuries of wind. Ranger stopped near the edge, whining softly. Caleb approached, scanning the rock face. Nothing but snow, stone, and shadow. "There's nothing here," he muttered. But Ranger's paw struck the ground twice. Then, with startling precision, the dog pushed its nose against a narrow fissure in the cliff wall. A low, mechanical click echoed beneath the wind. Caleb froze. "What the—" The rock shifted. A seam of light broke through the snow-covered surface, outlining the shape of a heavy metal door, hidden perfectly into the mountain. It creaked open just enough for the smell of oil and cold steel to drift out. Ranger stepped back, watching Caleb. Caleb raised his rifle, though his hands were trembling now. "Logan? What did you do?" he whispered. The dog barked once and entered the darkness. Caleb hesitated. Every rational thought told him to turn back, to go home, to close the door, to drink until he forgot. But the name Ranger Unit 17B still burned in his mind. Logan's last mission, the one that was never reported, the one command buried under layers of silence. And here it was, calling him from beneath a mountain. He took a deep breath, stepped through the door, and the mountain swallowed him whole. Inside was a narrow tunnel carved from bedrock, lined with rusted conduit and dim emergency lights that flickered weakly to life as they passed. The air was stale, metallic. Ranger limped ahead, but his pace quickened the deeper they went. Caleb's boots echoed against the floor, an old soldier returning to a world he swore he'd left behind. At the end of the tunnel, a second door waited, thicker, reinforced with steel beams. A keypad beside it blinked red. Caleb approached, wiped the frost off the screen. The display came alive with a faint hum. Then, to his astonishment, a message appeared. "Access granted. Vance, Logan." The door opened with a long hiss. The room beyond was vast, filled with the quiet hum of machines still alive after years of silence. Servers blinked like distant stars. Dust floated in beams of pale light from cracked fixtures above. Along one wall hung the faded emblem of a long-defunct military program. "Last watch." Caleb's chest tightened. He looked down at Ranger, who sat at his feet, tail curling once in recognition. "You led me here," he whispered. "You kept his promise." Ranger looked up at him, ears perked, and for a moment, Caleb swore he saw something in those eyes. A memory, a message, a ghost carried faithfully through storm and time. The storm outside raged on, but within the mountain, a silence older than war had begun to stir again. Caleb lowered his rifle, stepped toward the console, and whispered into the emptiness, "All right, Logan, I'm listening." The air inside the mountain was still and heavy, as if time itself had stopped breathing. Caleb moved through the tunnel, boots crunching over gravel and debris. The deeper he went, the more the flickering lights along the walls steadied, like the place was awakening to his presence. The metallic scent of oil mixed with the faint trace of something older, dust, gunpowder, memory. Ranger padded beside him, limping but determined. The faint sound of machines echoed ahead, like heartbeats muffled by stone. Caleb's hand brushed the cold steel of the wall as they reached a chamber wider than anything he'd imagined, a subterranean fortress carved into the spine of Ember Ridge. Desks, radios, and monitors lined the walls, frozen in time since the Cold War. Maps of old Soviet territories curled in their frames, but scattered among the relics were signs of recent life, clean tools, fresh footprints, a thermos half full. Someone had been here not long ago. Caleb's pulse quickened. He found a control terminal at the center of the room. The screen flickered to life as he brushed the dust away, revealing a login prompt already unlocked. Files scrolled across the display, classified coordinates, encrypted transmissions, and one folder standing out in bold red. Logan Vance, final entry. Caleb hesitated before opening it. His reflection stared back from the black glass. The worn soldier he'd become, and the man his friend once trusted. He pressed enter. The video began. Logan's face filled the screen. Gaunt, bruised, but his eyes still carried that quiet steadiness Caleb remembered. Behind him was the same chamber Caleb stood in now, though brighter, alive. "Caleb." Logan's voice cracked slightly, the sound of exhaustion layered with something deeper. Acceptance. "If you're seeing this, it means Ranger found you. Which means I didn't make it out." Caleb swallowed hard. Ranger let out a small whine and pressed his head against Caleb's knee. "I've found something, brother," Logan continued. "Viridian systems. They're not what they seem. They sold defense algorithms to foreign buyers, cleaned the trail through shell contracts and data brokers. Elias Kincaid's running it all. I've sent pieces of the evidence here, hidden under Project Last Watch. But I can't send it out. They're monitoring every line." He looked away as if hearing something beyond the camera. "They'll come for me soon. When they do, I'll make sure Ranger gets away. I'm leaving him with the coordinates and the access keys. He'll find you. He always did have better instincts than both of us." A faint smile tugged at Logan's lips. This place was built for the end of the world. Now it's the only place left where the truth can survive. You're the last one I trust, Caleb. Finish what I couldn't. The screen went black. Caleb's throat tightened. He stood there for a long moment, the hum of the servers filling the silence where his friend's voice had been. He looked around the chamber again, not as a ruin now, but as a monument. Logan had turned a relic of paranoia into a sanctuary of truth. Ranger barked once, tail low but steady. Caleb crouched and placed a hand on the dog's head. "You brought him home," he murmured. "You never stopped." He began to explore the rest of the base. There was a small armory stocked with weapons still sealed in grease, a generator room humming quietly, and a storage area filled with supplies, food, medical kits, batteries. Everything was orderly, methodical. Logan had prepared this place like a man who knew he wouldn't leave it alive. At the far end of the command room, Caleb found a reinforced door with a biometric panel. He pressed his palm to it, expecting nothing. But the system beeped and opened with a hiss. Inside was a small recording booth, the walls lined with old military insignia. On the console sat a portable drive labeled Last Watch, Master File. Caleb connected it to the terminal, the screen flooded with data, transactions, communication logs, satellite coordinates. All trails led to Viridian, names, accounts, payoffs. Enough to bring down an empire. But as he scrolled, an alert flashed across the corner of the screen. External trace detected. Signal origin, Viridian HQ, Washington, D.C. They knew. The system had just gone live for the first time in years, and Viridian's network had recognized its signature. Caleb shut the laptop, pulse hammering. The silence around him no longer felt like peace. It felt like being watched. He turned to Ranger, whose ears were pricked, gaze fixed toward the tunnel they had come from. "They're coming," Caleb whispered. The dog let out a low growl. He moved quickly, checking the old defense grid. Logan had rebuilt it with precision. Pressure sensors, electric gates, signal jammers, even old drone launchers. Caleb began activating each system, one by one, as the hum of generators deepened. Red lights flickered to life across the map of the ridge. But amid the rush, Caleb paused by the screen showing Logan's frozen image. "You always said the world doesn't need heroes, just men who remember what's right," he murmured. "Guess it's time I stop hiding." He turned to Ranger. "You ready, partner?" Ranger barked once, sharp and certain. Outside, the storm had not relented. Snow swept across the ridge in white fury, covering every footprint they had made. But deep within the heart of the mountain, the fortress of the fallen had awakened. Machines long silent began to hum again, lights flickering through forgotten corridors. Caleb stood before the terminal, the glow of the monitors reflecting in his eyes. He knew what was coming. Viridian would send men, machines, and death itself to bury what Logan had uncovered. But the old soldier inside him, the one he had tried to kill with whiskey and silence, was awake once more. And beside him, Ranger waited, steady as a shadow. "Let them come," Caleb said softly. The mountain listened, and somewhere in its hollow heart, the echo of that promise began to stir, an oath between man and dog, bound by loyalty, grief, and the unbroken code of those who keep the last watch. The mountain had gone silent again, but it was no longer a silence of peace. It was the stillness before the first shot. Deep inside the fortress, lights flickered across rows of old monitors as the systems came alive one by one. Caleb moved through the control room with the deliberate focus of a man who had done this before, securing perimeter lines, calibrating defense nodes, and checking the old comm arrays that Logan had left behind. Ranger followed closely, alert, his ears twitching with every sound the wind carried down from the ridge. On the central screen, the encrypted folder still glowed. Last watch. Caleb opened it carefully, entering the passcode Logan had whispered once in a bar years ago, long before either of them had known what they were dying for. The interface revealed itself. Thousands of files, tagged with Viridian's internal signatures, transfers, and call logs. It was proof of treason on an industrial scale. Then, the last file caught his eye, a line of code embedded into the system architecture itself, labeled Protocol Last Watch. Caleb clicked it open and read Logan's final annotation. If Viridian ever finds this place, assume the worst. Secure the data. Burn the rest. There's a failsafe built into the core. You'll know what to do. Caleb exhaled slowly. He knew what that meant. Logan had built this entire fortress not as a shelter, but as a weapon. He turned to Ranger. We're not just sitting here, he said quietly. We're fighting back. He began rerouting power from the reserve generators, feeding energy into the old defense network. A schematic of the mountain lit up, glowing red where motion sensors began to pulse. Cameras blinked to life in the tunnels, showing the storm raging outside. And then, something new. Thermal signatures. Dozens of them, moving fast through the snow. They were coming. Caleb's instincts clicked into place. He shut down all visible systems, switched the power grid to stealth mode, and pulled a pair of combat gloves from the locker. The smell of gun oil and cold steel filled the air as he checked the bolt of the sniper rifle Logan had left behind. Looks like we've got company, Ranger, he muttered. The dog's tail stiffened. He barked once, low and ready. Outside, the storm howled like artillery fire. Through the external camera feed, Caleb watched a black convoy crawl up the mountain road. Unmarked snow vehicles, armored, headlights dimmed. Men in tactical suits moved in formation, their helmets fitted with infrared visors. They were professionals, Viridian's private army. At their head was a tall figure with a distinct gait, Elias Kincaid, the man who had built the lie. Caleb leaned toward the microphone, though no one could hear him. You should have stayed in Washington, Kincaid. He triggered the first defense phase, a series of charges detonated under the ridge, not to kill, but to block the road. Snow and stone collapsed across the path, burying two vehicles instantly. The others stopped short. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Caleb switched to camera 2, infrared silhouettes scrambling, shouting. Then he engaged the jammers. Radios crackled, died. The men were cut off. From his vantage on the upper deck, Caleb adjusted the scope of his rifle. Through the snow, the world was a field of green shadows. He took a slow breath, exhaled, and fired. The round shattered the antenna of the lead truck, not the man beside it. Chaos rippled through the squad. Ranger moved like a ghost through the corridors, readying the secondary triggers Caleb had set up. Pressure plates, sonic emitters, light traps. When the first Viridian operative breached the outer tunnel, the ground beneath him hissed and exploded in a plume of compressed gas, knocking him flat. Non-lethal. Confusion was better than blood. Caleb wanted them scared, not dead. Minutes stretched like hours. The mountain became alive with controlled fury. Alarms humming in the distance, wind shrieking through broken vents, Rangers' claws echoing down steel corridors. Every time the soldiers thought they had found an entry, it vanished behind smoke and collapsing snow. Caleb kept his breath even. He remembered every ambush, every desert night when survival was measured in seconds. But this time, he wasn't fighting for a flag or command. He was fighting for the last words of a friend who trusted him with the truth. As he reloaded, a transmission suddenly crackled through the static, a voice, cold and unmistakable. "Rourke," Elias Kincaid said, his tone calm despite the chaos. "You don't know what you're interfering with. That data belongs to the government." Caleb smiled grimly. "The government doesn't sell soldiers, Kincaid. You do." The voice paused. "You can't win this. You're one man in a tomb." Caleb looked around at the fortress walls, at the humming machines, at the dog standing beside him with the loyalty of 10,000 men. "Then I guess I picked the right tomb." He switched off the radio and turned to Ranger. "We hold the ridge." They fell back into the main control room, sealing the entrance behind them. Ranger sat by the blast door, growling softly as distant footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Caleb keyed in a final line of code, locking the data drive inside a hidden chamber beneath the console. If he didn't make it out, at least the truth would. Snow and silence pressed against the world outside. Deep within the mountain, a man and his dog waited, surrounded by ghosts, as the storm and the enemy closed in. The war for Ember Ridge had begun, and for the first time in years, Caleb Rourke felt alive. Snow fell in thick swirling curtains that erased the world beyond 10 yards. The storm had become both ally and enemy, hiding Caleb and Ranger within its blind fury, but also cloaking the advancing threat of Viridian's strike team. The mountain itself seemed to breathe, the wind moaning through the narrow gullies like the ghosts of soldiers long forgotten. Caleb crouched behind a jagged ridge overlooking the pass known as Hawk's Hollow, a deep, serpentine gorge that sliced through the northern face of Ember Ridge. The place had earned its name for a reason. A single narrow path led in, surrounded by cliffs sharp enough to tear the sky. One road in, no way out. Perfect for what he intended. Beside him, Ranger lay low in the snow, his fur already white with frost, his amber eyes locked on the ridge below. The storm's howl masked the sound of their breaths. Caleb adjusted the rifle scope, aligning it on the mouth of the gorge where Viridian's convoy would soon emerge. His gloved hands moved with the precision of an old ritual. Load, breathe, wait. Down below, the faint glow of headlights shimmered through the snow like restless stars. They were coming. Caleb whispered, "Easy, boy, just like old times." The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Through the swirling snow, Caleb could make out the figures, black silhouettes moving in disciplined formation. Elias Kincaid's men. Their visors glowed faint green, cutting through the storm with thermal optics. They carried modern gear, built for urban operations, not this mountain hell. Caleb almost pitied them. Almost. He waited until the lead squad reached the narrowest section of the pass, then pressed the remote trigger. The ground erupted. A line of flashbangs buried under the snow detonated with blinding light and concussive thunder. The echoes rolled through the canyon like cannon fire. Men shouted, disoriented, stumbling into one another. Ranger leapt from cover, sprinting along the ridge and barking furiously. His voice was thunder in the storm, drawing their attention upward. Caleb took the shot. The bullet didn't aim to kill. It struck a rock beside the second squad, showering them in shards of ice. Panic spread. They fired blindly into the white abyss, bullets hissing into nothing. Caleb shifted position, firing again, each round placed to confuse and control. He was a ghost on the ridge, his rifle an echo of the man he once was. Below, Elias Kincaid barked orders through his headset, his breath visible in the cold. "Thermal scan the ridge. Sweep the left flank. He's here." Caleb smiled grimly. "You still think like a soldier, Elias, not like a hunter." He moved swiftly along the upper ledge, Ranger following his every motion. Together they triggered more traps. A tripline that sent a wall of snow crashing into the canyon. A mine that unleashed a blast of compressed air, scattering their drones from the sky. Every explosion was precise, timed to disorient rather than destroy. Caleb wanted them lost, afraid, doubting their own orders. But even ghosts make mistakes. As Caleb reloaded, a sharp sound sliced through the wind, the crack of a sniper round. The bullet tore through the edge of his shoulder pad, spinning him half around. Pain flared like fire down his arm. He rolled behind cover, gritting his teeth. Ranger growled, hackles raised, scanning the ridge opposite. A second shot followed, striking the snow inches from Caleb's boot. He grabbed the radio from his vest, flicking it on to Viridian's open frequency. "Nice try, Elias, but you brought city men to a mountain war." Static, then a calm reply. "You always were dramatic, Rourke. You think this ends with you and that dog? You're a relic. I bury relics." Caleb glanced at Ranger, whose eyes burned through the haze. "Then come and dig." He cut the line and reached for the detonator on his belt, a last contingency. Ranger moved ahead, sniffing through the snow, his senses locked onto the heat and scent of intruders. Caleb followed, blood seeping through his jacket, but his steps sure. They climbed down a narrow ridge, flanking the canyon from above. When they reached the overlook, Caleb saw them clearly now. Elias standing beside a fallen drone, scanning the cliffs. His men formed a perimeter, nervous, their shouts swallowed by the wind. The perfect stage. Caleb set the last charge. He waited until Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching into the snow. Then, detonation. A thunderous roar tore through Hawk's Hollow. The ledge beneath the strike team split, collapsing in a tidal wave of ice and rock. The canyon filled with white chaos, soldiers tumbling, radios screaming. Elias barely leapt aside in time, landing hard near the narrow exit. He spun, raising his rifle toward the ridge, but the storm cleared just enough for him to see them. Caleb, standing in silhouette above the collapsing pass. Ranger, beside him, like a sentinel carved from stone. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Their eyes met across the chasm, one filled with fury, the other with the hollow calm of a man who'd already lost everything once. "Game's over," Caleb called through the wind. "Go home, Elias. You can't kill what you already betrayed." But Elias raised his weapon. "You were always too sentimental, Rourke." A blur of motion broke the standoff. Ranger leapt from the ridge, teeth bared, hitting the snow beside Elias with terrifying speed. The rifle flew from Elias's hands as the dog pinned him to the ground, growling deep in his throat. Caleb descended fast, rifle still trained on his old commander. The wind screamed between them. Snow swirled like ash. "This doesn't have to end here," Elias hissed. "You don't know the truth. Logan, he was part of it. He used you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "No, he gave his life to stop you." Elias tried to reach for his knife, but Ranger snarled and clamped down harder. Caleb leveled the rifle. "Don't!" For a long moment, neither moved. Then Elias's expression changed. Fear, then bitterness, then surrender. He slowly raised his hands. Caleb lowered his weapon slightly, exhaustion settling into his bones. The storm had begun to calm, the wind easing into long sighs. Around them, silence returned to Hawk's Hollow, broken only by the rasping breath of a man defeated and the steady growl of the German shepherd who refused to let go. Ranger released his grip only when Caleb whispered, "Stand down." The dog obeyed, sitting back, eyes never leaving Elias. Caleb looked up toward the mountain peaks, where the clouds were breaking apart to reveal the faintest touch of dawn. "Logan," he murmured, "it's done." And for the first time in years, he felt something like peace, fragile, fleeting, but real, as the snow continued to fall, covering the battlefield that no one would ever find. The storm had quieted, leaving a gray stillness over the valley. The mountains of Ember Ridge rose like solemn guardians, their peaks ghosted by mist. Smoke drifted from the shattered ridge of Hawk's Hollow, where moments before, war had howled. Caleb moved through the wreckage, rifle lowered, his breath rising in slow, visible clouds. Around him lay silence, the kind that comes after too much noise, too much loss. Ranger trotted beside him, limping slightly but alert, his fur streaked with soot and snow. They passed the remains of Viridian's assault, shattered drones, twisted rifles half buried in drifts, and footprints already fading beneath falling flakes. The enemy had been driven out, or buried by their own ambition. But it wasn't victory Caleb felt. It was the weight of what came next. Elias Kincaid sat against a fallen log, wrists bound by cable ties, eyes dark with fury and resignation. The once proud intelligence officer was now just another man cornered by truth. Caleb approached slowly, lowering his weapon but keeping his guard. "You should have stayed down," he he said quietly. You had your empire. Wasn't that enough? Kincaid laughed weakly. You think this changes anything? Viridian built the future. You're just delaying it. The future doesn't belong to liars, Caleb answered. Kincaid sneered. You really believe that? You, of all people? You buried things too, Rourke. Orders you didn't question. People you couldn't save. Don't pretend you're the hero here. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The truth had never frightened him. It was living with it that did. He turned away, scanning the sky as the storm broke apart. The first light of morning spilled across the ridge, weak but clean. Maybe not a hero, he said at last. Just a man who finally stopped running. Ranger gave a low growl, breaking the quiet. He had turned toward the mouth of the canyon, toward the direction of the hidden fortress. The instinct was clear. They had unfinished business. Caleb gave a short nod. Yeah, boy, let's go home. He left Kincaid bound and silent in the snow. There would be a reckoning for him soon enough. The world beyond the ridge would see to that. But Caleb had something greater to finish, something his friend had died for. By the time they reached the bunker, the sun had climbed higher, painting the frost-covered pines in silver. The massive steel door stood half open, its surface cracked from the earlier blasts. Inside, the control room glowed faintly under emergency power, as if waiting for his return. The hum of old machines was steady, a pulse beneath the earth. Caleb approached the console where the words still flickered. Project Last Watch, active. Ranger padded up beside him, resting his head against Caleb's arm. For a long time, the man just stood there, staring at the files his friend had died to protect. He remembered Logan's voice in the video, steady, brave, unshaken even as the world turned against him. You're the last one I trust, Caleb whispered. I hope I earned that. He inserted the portable drive into the main terminal. The screen lit up with the command interface. He opened the final directory. Protocol. Inside was a single executable file, marked with a red sigil. Scuttle. Next to it was a message, time-stamped the day Logan vanished. If you're reading this, it's over. Everything that mattered is here. You know what to do. When this runs, the system will purge itself and bury the truth beneath the mountain. That's how we keep it safe. But before you do, it's yours now, brother. The fight, the name, the watch. Logan. Caleb closed his eyes. The memories came rushing like a tide. Logan's laughter in the desert, the echo of rotor blades at dusk, the handshake before the last mission. He had carried the guilt of his friend's death like a wound that never healed. Now, standing here, he understood. Logan hadn't died in vain. He had built something enduring, the truth, hidden but alive. Caleb pressed a key. Execute Scuttle Protocol. Warning lights flared red across the room. Sirens wailed softly, echoing through the tunnels. The files began to vanish one by one, encrypted data, schematics, transmissions, turning into light before fading forever. The base that had guarded so many lies was cleansing itself, erasing its existence. He whispered to Ranger, "Time to go." They moved down the main corridor as the walls trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The old structure groaned under the weight of its own destruction. Caleb grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and followed Ranger toward the exit. Behind them, the heavy doors sealed with a final metallic sigh. The mountain began to close, burying its secrets once more. Outside, the wind had stilled. The first rays of sunrise painted the snow in gold. Caleb stood at the edge of the ridge, breathing deeply for the first time in what felt like years. The guilt that had haunted him seemed to lift with the mist. Ranger sat beside him, tail brushing the snow. Caleb reached down, scratching behind his ears. "He'd be proud of you," he said softly. "You never gave up on him." Ranger barked once, as if in reply. Below them, the last traces of smoke rose from Hawk's Hollow, curling into the brightening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called, a solitary note carried by the wind. Caleb looked east, where the sun burned over the horizon. "Come on," he murmured, "let's go find what's next." And together, man and dog began the long walk down from Ember Ridge, leaving behind the mountain that had once been their tomb, and now their redemption. Morning rose quietly over Ember Ridge, bleeding soft amber light across the frozen pines. The storm was gone, leaving behind a strange and fragile peace, the kind that follows endings. Caleb Rourke stood at the mouth of the valley, his breath ghosting in the cold air, the last smoke from the buried fortress fading behind him. The mountain no longer hummed with machines or secrets. It was silent again, a tomb sealed by loyalty. Ranger padded ahead through the snow, tail swaying, fur glinting gold beneath the first sun. His paw prints led a single line eastward, away from war, toward whatever remained of the world. Caleb followed, his boots crunching softly. Every step felt lighter now, as though something had finally lifted from his chest. Guilt, loss, and the heavy, endless question of, why him, not me? The mountain wind carried only faint echoes of what they had survived: gunfire, betrayal, and the voice of a friend who had refused to be forgotten. Logan Vance was gone, but his legacy lived on in the dog trotting ahead, and in the man who had finally kept his promise. Caleb paused at the ridge's edge. Below lay the road, a narrow trail cutting through the valley, dusted with frost and morning light. Beyond it, the horizon stretched wide and unmarked. He crouched beside Ranger, running a hand along the dog's neck, where the paracord collar still hung. "That's it, partner," he said softly. "No more ghosts." Ranger tilted his head, amber eyes catching the light, as if understanding. Then he barked once, sharp and certain, before bounding down the trail. Caleb smiled faintly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Lead the way." They walked for hours, the ridge slowly giving way to lower country, pines thinning into frozen meadows, the air warmer with each mile. A flock of crows lifted from a nearby tree, black against the rising sun. Somewhere beyond the hills, a river murmured beneath the ice, promising motion, life, and distance. For the first time in years, Caleb allowed himself to think beyond survival. Maybe there was a town down the road, a quiet diner, a place where no one recognized his face or his name. Maybe he could be just another man, with an old dog and too many stories he'd never tell. When they reached the first bend in the trail, Caleb stopped again and looked back. Ember Ridge stood in the distance, a pale shadow beneath the sky. The fortress, the war, the pain, they were part of him, but no longer chains around his soul. "You did good, Logan," he whispered. "It's over." Ranger barked once more, the sound echoing off the hills like a final salute. As they continued down the road, the wind carried faint scents of wood smoke and pine sap, signs of life. A mile ahead, a small truck stop sat beneath a rusted sign, half buried in snow. Caleb could almost hear the creak of its swinging door, the hum of a heater inside. Civilization, or something close to it. He touched the badge tucked in his coat pocket, a relic from another life, and smiled faintly before slipping it into the snow beside the road. "We don't need that anymore," he said. Ranger sniffed it once, then turned away, tail wagging as they pressed on. By midday, the valley had opened into a vast plain of frozen light. The world seemed endless again, and for the first time, that didn't terrify him. It felt like mercy. Somewhere, far from the mountains, in the heart of Washington, D.C., a woman named Mira Dalton opened a small parcel delivered without a return address. Inside lay a folded letter, handwritten in steady, unpretentious lines. "You told the truth when no one else would. Thank you. The world is better for it." A friend? Beneath it was an old army insignia, tarnished but polished clean, and a single silver dog tag engraved with one word: Ranger. Mira's eyes welled. She set the letter down gently and whispered, "He made it." Outside her office window, dawn was breaking over the Capitol dome. News headlines were already spreading. Viridian systems exposed, executives arrested, investigations underway. The nation was awake, and justice had begun to stir. Back on the open road, Caleb adjusted the strap of his pack, pulling it higher on his shoulder. Ranger trotted ahead, ears perked, every step steady and sure. The mountains behind them faded into mist, but neither looked back. The road stretched east, long and winding beneath the rising sun, a promise of forgiveness, of peace, of the simple grace of moving forward. Caleb glanced at his companion and smiled. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. "Let's see what tomorrow looks like." And together, man and dog walked into the light, leaving behind a mountain full of ghosts, and carrying with them a legacy carved in loyalty, courage, and love that refused to die. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm around us. He calms the storm within us. Caleb's journey through Ember Ridge reminds us that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they walk beside us on four loyal legs, guiding us back toward faith, forgiveness, and peace. Just like Caleb, many of us carry hidden battles, old wounds we bury deep in the mountains of our hearts. But when we choose truth over fear, loyalty over comfort, and faith over despair, God reveals his quiet miracles. The storm ends not because the world changes, but because we do. So tonight, as you finish this story, remember, no matter how cold the night feels, dawn always comes. Trust in his timing, believe in his mercy, and hold close those who walk beside you, for they might be the answer to a prayer you didn't know you made. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may find light through their own darkness. Comment your thoughts, subscribe for more stories of faith and courage, and may God bless every soul who listens with love and hope in their heart. And if you believe that his miracles still move quietly among us, comment Amen.